What does the shutdown of SAPA mean for South Africa's media landscape? Is the business of news gathering profitable? What is the African News Agency going to do differently? And what does the future hold for SAPA staff? What time is it? It's question time. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Mpho Tsedu. Come the 31st of March 2015, the South African Press Association, commonly known as SAPA, will close down. After its formation in 1938, the association has played a pivotal role within South Africa's communication landscape, particularly within the print media. SAPA over the years produced some of today's leading newsmen and women. SAPA's closure also means fate of about 40 of their journalists hangs in the balance. Does this closure mean the end of news agencies? And will the African News Agency be able to fill this possible vacuum? My guest today is joining us from Sea Point Studios in Cape Town. Chris Borain is the Chief Executive Officer of African News Agency. And on the line we have Mike Lowe. He's the founder of East Cape News. Now, gentlemen, welcome to the show. Mike, let me start with you. Your agency ended up closing down. What was the reason?
Yeah, well, first, I'm sorry. I'm in the newsroom today. It's quite noisy. But first of all, I was not the founder of the East Cape News Agency's Trust. That started in 1985 with a collection of freelance journalists led by Franz Kruger. In fact, we were based in the Eastern Cape, and we heard via the grapevine that it was we were encouraged to start up alternative news agencies which would produce copy that wasn't being covered or wasn't being covered in the same way in the mainstream media, and we went for it. And then by 1995, I returned to Grahamstown and took over East Cape News Agency's Trust, which ran out of money. The money was, we were told, going to government, and then we made a go of it as a commercial entity. Ran it for 10 years, did a lot of training, did a lot of news provision, and then the market shut down on us. And I just want to say, the one thing about SAPA, and I know those guys well, they actually helped us. We used to pay SAPA, I think it was a nominal fee of 1,000 Rand a month, and they would put our news out on their PR wire, but most of our clients used it, and that we got the most amazing distribution. So thanks, SAPA. I think you've done a magnificent job, and it's very sad that this semi-independent agency is now going down.
I wanted to just come to that point as to how do you feel now that an entity such as SAPA is also, following suit?
Well, it's a sign that in 1995 the space was open. Everyone was open. We wanted a diverse and free media. It was a very exciting period, and the editors that we worked for were up for it. They enjoyed our fresh and original content that came from outside of their newsroom, and they published a hell of a lot of our copy. And I think that over time, with the kind of crunch and the more sort of monopolization of media and the growth of these corporations and a whole lot of politics, we've just seen that space being narrowed down to the point where even SAPA can't make it. And that was supposed to be an agreement between the major media houses, and they all chipped in, and that's how SAPA survived, and they were sharing copy. But ultimately, you can see that the reality facing certain sections of our media has kicked in, and SAPA has gone down. People don't want to support it, they're gone. We always knew that as a news agency, if we didn't have support from inside those newspapers, from or radio stations, from the editors and news desks and so on, you were done. And I'm afraid to say that this is just another sign that even the big player has gone down.
Now that you are in the newsroom, as you say, at Daily Dispatch, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, chief reporter here. Yeah.
Now, working in the newsroom of a newspaper like that, how do you foresee the future without an entity like SAPA? How does it affect your day-to-day job?
No, I think our group has already canned its subscription to SAPA a couple of months ago. But I just want to say one thing, that in terms of the small agency, there is one agency still operating. It's sort of unknown, but it's producing some amazing young reporters. That's the Walter Sisulu News Agency, whom I used to work with at East Cape News, and they actually have a little newsroom. It's a wonderful facility. They produce a handful of really skilled and switched on young, mainly African reporters, which is what we were trying to do as well. So there is some hope somewhere out there, But, working for the Dispatch, I'm lucky. It's a wonderful newspaper, and It's in a fantastic period of actually survival and a little bit of growth. And I've come through a lot of newsrooms. The one thing about running a news agency is I went through most of them. We got to meet most of the editors, and that was a great opportunity.
And is the business of news agencies profitable?
There were two models at the time, and both of them are instructive. And I'm not talking about SAPA was a deal between the major corporations, but we were independent. We made our own stuff. We sold news into those corporations, and the African Eye News Agency really created a magnificent model. And they made a go of it. But we got by. We made our thing, but we weren't as slick and as tightly organized on the business and administrative front. We did some amazing journalism, but quite frankly, our administration sucked. But that's just a lesson you learn in hindsight. I still hanker for the days when we get these agencies back, because they are an expression of our society turning away from the current kind of quite scary sort of criticism of becoming a police state towards going back towards a more open society.
If you could just stay with me for one more minute. We've got Chris Borain, he's the Chief Executive Officer of Africa News Agency, joining us from our Cape Town studios. Chris, having heard what Mike has said, what comes to mind? You're coming into a terrain which somebody like him has actually traveled in the past.
Good afternoon, Paul, and thanks for the time. It is, as I think your previous guest said, it's a very scary terrain to operate in. I think him coming from the Daily Dispatch, the withdrawal of Times Media, which is the organisation he works for, was probably one of the precipitating factors that caused the closure of SAPA. Once they pulled out, SAPA, which was an agreement between Times Media, the independent group Caxton, and Media 24, lost one of its founding members and just couldn't afford to stay afloat anymore.
Yes.
It was providing news out, but what it wasn't doing was doing so on a commercial basis. I think the journalists that have come through SAPA, and there have been a lot in the South African landscape, have been doing a fantastic job, and SAPA has been doing a fantastic job. Just without it being a commercial operation, I think any business that isn't founded on purely commercial grounds will always struggle.
Mike, Chris is about to enter this terrain which you have been through. What would be your advice?
Well, I think he's given himself his own best advice, which is to watch the pennies and run a tight ship, and then realize where he operates or what the terrain is like in terms of paying his staff and then going out and doing the fun stuff, which is the journalism. It's been done, and it can be done. It's just good business sense is all that's required. And the problem with journalists is we suffer a bit from kind of bipolarism. You're either doing the journalism or you're doing the business. And sometimes, in my case, I just fell between the cracks. If I could have done it differently, I would have maybe done more business and created the space for the journalists to work and play in.
Do you find yourselves as more of a training ground for your bigger boys to come and poach?
Oh gosh, no. We used to laugh about it. We sometimes, African Eye used to want to charge a fee when the guys got poached. But look, plenty journalists have come through these agencies. Andrew Trench was an original East Cape News Agency's kind of journalist. Guy Jepson came through us. I can look around in my own newsroom here, and there's just many of us. So they're vital to a really vibrant and diverse media. They really play an enormous role.
Yes.
And I think it's a pity that the bigger corporations have gone in this direction, because in fact they should be supporting those kind of projects for the work that they're putting in training young reporters. I'm also sad to say that my friend Steve Kretzmann also closed down West Cape News Agency, which he started a few years ago, and I think they were doing a great job as well.
Okay. Mike, let me thank you for the time.
Cool, Paul. Thanks, guys. Good luck out there.
All righty.
Cheers, thanks very much, Mike.
That was Mike joining us from Cape, or rather in the Eastern Cape there, where he's currently with the Daily Dispatch. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we continue our discussion this question time. Please don't go away.
Let us go to this dolus issue, dolus eventualis, dolus director. What do they actually mean to the ordinary man in the street?
A practical and easy example of dolus eventualis is where two robbers walk into a bank with the intention to rob the bank. They reconcile themselves that should the teller press the panic button, they are going to pull a trigger and kill. So the intention is not to kill, but the intention is basically to rob the bank.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. Our guest from our Sea Point studios in Cape Town, Chris Borain, is the CEO of African News Agency. And on the line, we'll also be joined now by Wellington Khadu from the Media Monitoring Africa. But firstly, Chris, you are going to a terrain which, an institution has just closed shop. What are you going to be doing differently?
I think what we're going to try and do differently is earlier, as I spoke about, doing it on a lot more commercial terms, and B, we see South Africa as the starting point for us. So SAPA closing down, there's an urgent need and a vacuum, one might say, in the newsrooms from the end of March. And so we will want to take over where SAPA left off, go and approach as many of SAPA's clients and say we will offer a better or a similar, if not better, service with better technology. Okay. But then that's just a starting point. We want to be rolling out, offering a similar service into 15 countries in Africa by the end of July, and 50 countries up into, including Cairo and Egypt, so North Africa, by the end of the year. So we really are trying to broaden the base of countries that we are able to offer the service in, and to just make it more commercial. I mean, SAPA had a really good news service that they delivered, and also had a very good PR service. And there's a great requirement for that, not only here in South Africa, but in the rest of Africa as well. Now,
does the existence of news agencies affect the productivity of newsrooms? I mean, in an institution like ours, does the fact that there's no news agency therefore have to really impact on our jobs?
I think what it will require, and a lot of news organizations have gone through this in the last while, is there's been a lot of cutting back of staff, not only locally but internationally, particularly in the newspaper groups, where people have been laying off staff because there's been a reliance on SAPA. The Times Media Group cut away from SAPA at the beginning of the beginning of 2014. But what they've done, particularly across their websites, so Times Live, News 24, IOL, M&G, a lot of the online websites rely quite heavily on SAPA because of the business model that they're in. Mm-hmm. So any news organization will be required, if there's no news agency like a SAPA or an ANA, to beef up their news reporting opportunities and the news reporting structures quite heavily. Now, those kind of opportunities to do that just don't exist anymore because, from an advertising perspective, the advertising rands have decreased. So all news organizations, be in any form of broadcast or print or digital media, are going through the same cost-cutting exercises across the board. So what a news agency is able to do is fill a hole where you don't have an individual newsroom, doesn't have the resources to go out and cover every story. So what we will do by showing our diary of the events that we're going to be doing during the course of the day, what we then allow the newsrooms to do is say, okay, well, A&A is going to be covering these news stories. We will be able to send out the limited amount of reporters that we have, and we will be able to cover other stories. So it allows them to focus on issues of greater importance to them, and it allows an organization like mine to go out and report on the facts and report on breaking news as and when it happens, because that's our focus. Our focus is not on writing editorial. Our focus is on just reporting the facts as quickly as we possibly can.
Wellington, let me bring you on here. Is there space for news agencies, or are they reaching their sell-by date?
Look, I think there is space. We know this because the fact that SAPA closed down is a huge blow to media diversity. But also, as Chris was saying, it's an opportunity for ANA to take over from there. The reason I think that there is space is because, as Chris was saying, we have seen newsrooms dwindling in terms of numbers, and also the resources being pumped into newsrooms are dwindling. So the good thing about SAPA was that, in as much as it's on issues, it was able to cover areas that other newsrooms could not cover. And I hope that ANA will also be able to provide similar service, and it will add to the diversity of the stories that we'll be getting.
You obviously being in the media monitoring, you come from Media Monitoring Africa. Are you seeing news agencies doing something which news bodies and newsrooms, your mainline newsrooms, that is, are failing to do?
Look, that's a very interesting question, because by and large what we see is that with social media, breaking news is just being broken on Twitter or Facebook.
Yes.
What newsrooms could actually start doing now is offering context and analysis to breaking news. So I'm hoping that going forward we'll be able to see more and more of that on news. But again, breaking news also is important. So what we need to start seeing is a media that contextualizes issues and also put it into perspective.
Would you say that perhaps your traditional media houses are failing to embrace the full potential of technology, as you're saying, to a point where they either are recycling stories that news agencies are bringing, or they are going out to get themselves and not necessarily taking the story beyond using this technology that you're saying, you're referring to?
That's a yes and no and no answer, because what we're seeing is a trend where news, by and large, is similar across the various newsrooms, which is to say that you have a similar story covered, let's say, on Media 24 and IOL across the board. And part of the reason is because, as Chris was saying, you have newsrooms that don't have as many resources as they used to have. This is not only a South African problem, it's an African problem, it's an international problem. What we're also seeing is a trend where there's a high volume of people who are moving out of the newsroom and becoming PR people. So in the US, for instance, in 2010, you had a ratio of public relations people as in 1:2 journalists, but now we have public relations people that are 4 compared to 1 journalist, which essentially says that you have a lot of people that are moving out of the newsroom. Now that creates a huge problem. But social media is bringing in a new potential for newsrooms. And there are newsrooms that are using social media and various platforms to at least cover as many areas and as many stories as possible. Okay. But some newsrooms are still lagging behind.
Okay, hold the thought there, Wellington. If you could just give us an extra few minutes, I would really appreciate that. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we wrap up the program. Please don't worry.
Cultures of Africa, though similar in some ways, are colorful and diverse.
We explore the rich culture, dance and dress of the Tanzanian people of the Mtwara region.
The dance that they're performing is what you will find in the village. And it's not just a paid gig, it's something they do, they enjoy.
Mtwara's late development has left it with a rich reservoir of empirical knowledge of a purer African life.
For whatever the reasons are, it's one of the last areas of the country to develop, and thus traditional arts and traditional culture.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays, 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. Our guest from our Sea Point studios in Cape Town is Chris Borain. He's the CEO of Africa News Agency. And on the line, we have Wellington Khadu from the Media Monitoring Africa. Chris, let me just get down to you in Cape Town. What kind of an environment are you launching ANA into here in South Africa, that is?
When you say environment, are you talking about the newsrooms that we're going to be servicing, or are you talking about the newsroom that I'm going to be creating?
No. The environment where your reporters are going to be operating in. I just need an analysis. Yes, your analysis of what kind of an environment the media is operating in today here in South Africa.
I think if I understand you correctly, I mean the media agents. The media companies that exist currently are all going through quite intensive cost pressures. So it's a very tough environment to exist in. And also there's I think Wellington talked earlier about the all-pervasiveness of social media.
Yeah.
So in the current news environment, what you need to be able to create is breaking news, but you need to be able to have fact-checked it and have accurate complete news that you go out with. I think the environment has changed so radically from where SAPA started 74 years ago to the technology-rich environment that we operate in now, where our journalists will be out in the field on a laptop or on an iPad using cell phone technology to upload their story into the cloud, which will then be fed to third parties almost instantaneously. Whereas in the past, that just couldn't happen. So news is breaking very, very quickly. But there's always going to be a requirement for good, accurate journalism. It will always trump just pure social media saying this might have happened or this might have happened. Everything that we do and have to do needs to be fact-checked to the nth degree. But it's a very exciting environment to go into because it's changing so fast. Okay. And you're required to modify your approach to news and what you offer to various people all the time. It's a very dynamic environment.
You're coming in at a time when there have been questions raised about media freedom. You're not worried?
I don't think so. I mean, all our journalists have to sign a strict code of conduct in terms of editorial independence and free from bias. And as long as we are writing the truth, the customers that we sell the truth to will judge whether we're doing a good job or not. As long as we do that, we don't have anything to fear.
Wellington, the state of media freedom in South Africa. Yes, Wellington? I think, Wellington is not with us anymore. But perhaps, Chris, let me just pose that same question to you. Are you happy? Are you content with the space which the media is allowed to do their business?
I think in any democracy there are always questions and issues around media freedom. South Africa's just come out very well placed in terms of media freedom, in terms of international standards. I think there are always going to be pressure points where information is withheld or not disclosed in the correct environment. But I think journalists, by and large in this country, have unfettered access and are allowed to publish. We're not in an environment where if we do publish, we are scared of the repercussions as happened in Charlie Hebdo in France. We're a different country. We operate under very much more of an open democracy. And I think our journalists are able to pursue the truth across the board without too much fear of being knocked over or influenced or shot in the case of what happened in Paris.
Okay, Wellington, I think we have you back on the line. I wanted to just check with you the environment in which the media is operating today in Africa. Rather, let's focus on South Africa. How free is the media, and can ANA look forward to a free environment where they will be able to report as they see the stories develop?
Look, the environment is certainly far better than it was prior to 1994. However, that is not to say that there are no challenges. I mean, what we saw in Parliament happening a few days ago is with the concern, and what we also saw happening in the Gauteng legislature as well,
is another thing that we also have to be worried and vigilant about. However, I think compared to other African countries, and certainly what's happening in other countries, certainly a country like Turkey, for instance, you see that the conditions are far worse than they are. And South Africa's democracy is still fledgling, and I'm hoping that both media and civil society and citizens will be able to push for media freedom. But the environment is far, far better than it was prior to 1994.
When one looks at your name, Chris, the name of the agency is Africa News Agency, and ANA. Should we expect that you're going to tell an African story?
As I said originally, certainly initially we're going to be focusing on a South African story, but we are wanting to expand into Africa and tell an African news story within the next, certainly the short to medium term, 6 months. It's important that that we do focus out into Africa, because at the moment news services and news syndication services that exist tell the African story from an external perspective. They tell it from the perspective of someone sitting at a desk in London or in Paris or in Atlanta. What we're wanting to do is tell the African story and uncover the hidden African stories that we can then tell to the rest of the world. So certainly that is there's a strong emphasis that we're going to be placing on news as we go forward.
Wellington, should news agencies be worried that they must tell a positive African story, or should they just, report the African story as they see it?
Look, an African story is an African story, whether positive or negative, and I think the challenge that ANA will have is what we're currently seeing and what Chris has referred to. What we have been seeing, the trends, is that Africa was seen from the eyes of an external person. Now, what we also see in some of the stories is that there is greater far explanation in international media than there is in our national media, which is a very grave concern. I mean, think about what happened with the collapse of that church in Nigeria. You had the coverage that would give you context and analysis coming from international news agencies and very little from the African continent. And I think what ANA needs to do is to entrench this idea that we need to present Africa from African eyes. Whether the story is negative or positive, it really doesn't matter, as long as it's seen from African eyes and portrayed in African eyes.
Wellington, let me thank you very much, and Chris Borain also, thank you very much. That was Question Time for today. You can get in touch with us. Our email address, questiontime@sabc.co.za. Our Twitter handle @questiontime24. You can also follow me on Twitter @Mpho Tsedu. From me and the crew, have yourself a wonderful time. Goodbye.